Sharecropper to shareholder. This short yet powerful phrase holds great significance for me and my family. It's a story of hope, inspiration, empowerment, opportunity, and ownership. You see, today's theme of no limits speaks directly to what I'm going to share with you today. It's about not placing limits on ourselves, our families, but most importantly, one of our most precious resources, our children. You see, my journey has taken me from the West Garfield Park neighborhood here in Chicago to the Latin school where I graduated in 1996 and now serve on the board, to Tulane where I studied engineering, to Procter & Gamble for my first job, to New York to get my MBA at Columbia Business School, and now back to Chicago where I work as a private equity investor at a firm that manages over $1 billion. Now, that's not exactly where my story started. It goes back before the West Side. But there's no data that you could have viewed that would have predicted that I'd be standing here today. Least of all, wearing this fancy blue suit and this little red circle. This is a sharecropping family from the 1800s. For those unfamiliar with the term sharecropper, these were families that picked cotton in fields on behalf of landowners and were provided meager wages and a place to live. It was the next iteration of slavery in our country. It evokes feelings of fear, misery, hopelessness. These are two obituaries. No need to start crying. This is Dave Barnard, born in 1885, and Kathleen Shorter Barnard, born in 1910. 1885, just 20 years after the end of the Civil War and the supposed end of slavery. They also happen to be my great-grandparents. You see, they were sharecroppers in Mississippi, in a small town called Ruleville. They had 8 children, and number 4 is sitting with us in this room today. Her name is Ruby Riley, my grandmother, AKA Granny. I post online about Granny all the time, so she comes out and I bring her to these events and everybody runs up to her and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the one speaking today. You see, Granny picked cotton in those fields as a young child with her siblings and her cousins so that their family could have a place to live. And like millions of African Americans during the 1950s, as she grew up, they wanted to come north in search of better opportunity. And they fled the South, moved north as part of the Great Migration. And they settled in Chicago in the North Lawndale neighborhood before ultimately buying a home in Austin. The picture you see here is my granny, her husband, my late grandfather. I call him Papa. His name is Kerry Riley. And the 3 kids are my mother, my aunt, and my uncle. It's my mother you see highlighted there. And Granny was focused on providing food, shelter, and clothing for her kids. She wanted to protect them. You see, she barely got high school education. But through all of that hard work, her 3 children did finish high school. My mom went on to marry my father, whom she met at Lindblom, and they went on to have 3 children. I'm the oldest. I have a younger sister, Quinessa, and my baby sister, Adrian. She's 30, but I still call her my baby sister. And so my mom, like the focus that her mother had before her, also focused on food, shelter, and clothing. We had limited economic resources in the household. She worked 2 jobs for as long as I could remember. But that didn't stop her. She didn't allow the neighborhood, the crime, the poverty, the lack of resources to stop her from focusing on something that perhaps Granny wasn't quite prepared to push, and that's education. And so my mom, given those limited resources, was still able to put 3 children through college. Me from Tulane, both of my younger sisters from the University of Illinois. I then went on to Columbia, as I said earlier, to get my MBA. Now, my middle sister had the first child of the family, my little niece Cadence that you see there. But before that, something unfortunate happened in my life. I lost my mother, Granny's daughter, February 19th, 2006. That was a Sunday. My sister called me that Thursday and said, Rendel, you need to come home. I said, is this really the time? See, Mom had been sick for a while, and I couldn't afford to fly home every single time she went to the hospital. My sister said, yep, this is the time you need to come home. Wasn't able to get home that Friday, flew home that Saturday. My mother passed on that Sunday. About a year later, my sister learns that she's pregnant. Take one guess what the due date was. February 19th, 2006. Didn't happen that way because Cadence is a little stubborn. And she was born February 21st of 2008. As I thought about my experiences over all those years, college, throughout high school, back to Chicago where I was now working, I thought about how could I take the next step to move my family forward. And I said I was going to pour everything into this young girl. See, I don't have any kids right now, so she gets spoiled at this time. But I became the uncle that was going to buy her more functional gifts and not just toys. Didn't always make me the most popular uncle, but she'll be okay. I bought her books to read, a globe so she could think about traveling the world. I started a college savings plan since birth so she wouldn't have to face some of the financial challenges that I had in college. And the most profound moment came about 2 years ago. I decided to buy Cadence shares in Nike, Apple, and Disney. And to explain to her what that meant, I walked her into each store just down the street here in Chicago in Michigan. Nike Town, Apple Store, Disney Store. At the time, they were right next to each other. And I said, Cadence, you own this store now. Everything here is yours. The toys, the dolls, the basketballs, the laptops, the phones. Everything here is yours. This cashier works for you. Cashier didn't find that as funny as I thought it was. And then Cadence responds, cool, Uncle Ren. Do I get free stuff now? I said, it doesn't quite work that way, Cadence. You're a shareholder, not a thief. Sometimes that's synonymous. But then she said, Uncle Ren, do I make money when people buy stuff? I said, what? She's 8 years old at this point, guys. Do I make money when people buy stuff? I said, you kind of do. Let me explain that. A couple weeks later, I said, Cadence, how you doing? Have you looked up your stock, see how they're doing? Yep, I want some more. Well, what do you want? More of what you already have, or do you want a different stock? Now I can talk to her about diversification. She said, I want Starbucks. I said, why? Who 8-year-old wants Starbucks? She said, well, my mommy buys coffee from there all the time, and I saw that their stock was up today. Good enough for me. I get Cadence some Starbucks stock. A couple weeks later, she's in a Starbucks with her mother, my sister, and she grabs her mother by the arm and says, Mommy, you know I own this place a little bit. Mommy, you know I own this place a little bit. It was at that time that I had this very simple yet magnificent idea. I said, if I can get an 8-year-old to think about ownership from the simple act of giving her shares, then why can't I do that with 10 more kids, 100 more, 1,000 more? And keeping with the theme of no limits, that's exactly what I set out to do. I started an organization called One Stock, One Future, with the mission to turn 1 million underserved youth into public company shareholders. We do that by teaching basic classes about what it means to own stock and ownership, and the nonprofit donates shares to each kid, with the goal, as I mentioned earlier, to provide a sense of hope, inspiration, empowerment, and opportunity. The picture you see here is the first class that I conducted in July of 2016. We partner with nonprofits, government agencies, schools, religious organizations, sports teams. We don't discriminate. We want to turn every child into a shareholder. Now, why do I want to do that? What's the impact? What's that going to do? I'm going to describe that using something I call ABC. Pretty straightforward, right? Attitudes. I want to change children's sense of self and belonging. I want them to better understand their place in this world and the value that they bring to it. I want to change behaviors at home, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, their ultimate relationship with money, how they think about jobs and entrepreneurship, and simply being better citizens. And last but certainly not least, I want to change the conversation that we have with children. We can talk to them now about economics, money, and wealth, but I can also talk about fairness, inclusion, social justice, and equity. Sharecropper to shareholder. It's a long-term proposition to change attitudes and behaviors. It's not going to happen overnight, and we can't solve all the issues overnight. But I believe I'm on to something. You see, in just 68 years and 3 generations, just within my family, we went from picking cotton in the field to picking stocks on the weekend. Sharecropper to shareholder. Every one of you in this room has a cadence somewhere in your life. Could be your child, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, a friend's child, a godchild, or maybe even a random kid on the street that you can assist. Now imagine a world where every child believes that they are an owner and that they belong. There's a lot more work to do, but I believe we can change the world and the future, one stock at a time. Thank you.